Hi there, and welcome to Week 4, Climate Change and Schooling. Jacqueline and I will be facilitating this week's discussion, and we're looking forward to it. Please make sure you watch Jacqueline's intro video and sign up for our conference if you're interested. Also, please know that you can be as creative as you'd like in your discussion post this week. You can possibly answer in video or podcast format, or add some visual representations in the discussion forum. There are many great points from this week's readings, and we will discuss some main ones in this slideshow. All of this week's readings show the issues with current climate change education, such as it's not a requirement to teach climate change education is unconsciously avoided as it may be controversial, especially amongst parents. There's no preparation or training for teachers or educators. Student voice is absent. Climate change education is confined in traditional and formal spaces. It has shallow engagement, a lack of holistic responses to climate change. The methods are too technical and knowledge-based, it's not creative or applicable, and the methods do not empower students to act. So, what is wrong with our current education? Climate change is not the work of ignorant people, David Orr says. He thinks that there is something missing from our current educational standpoint if those educated are mainly responsible for climate change. There is an increase of data, words, and graphs in our current education, but there is no increase of knowledge and wisdom. So what should be included in our education, he asks. What is currently lacking? Orr thinks we need to trade in theories for values and emphasize values over success. Some values that we need to emphasize include peace, love, and healing. So how do we change our education? We need to implement 6 principles. Number 1. All education is environmental education. Education needs to be cross-curricular and holistic. Environmental education needs to happen all of the time. Number 2. The goal of education is not mastery of subject matter, but of one's person. Values are emphasized over facts and knowledge. Number 3. Knowledge carries with it the responsibility to see that it is well used in the world. How will we use this knowledge? Number 4. We cannot say that we know something until we understand the effects of this knowledge. Number 5. The importance of minute particulars and the power of examples over words. Actions speak louder than words. Also, learning through a hands-on method is more successful than learning through other methods. Due to the issues outlined earlier, this week's reading suggests several goals or requirements which need to be put in place and practiced to rectify these issues. We just discussed Orr's suggestions. Now let's see some others. It has been discussed in many of the readings that future climate change education should demand a high focus on creativity and critical thinking, capacity building, inquiry, understanding, asking critical questions, and determining appropriate actions. The Climate Change Education Acting for Change reading states 3 goals for climate change education. Goal number 1, recognize the importance of education as a response to climate change. Goal number 2, share innovative and practical school-based approaches to climate change education. Goal number 3, make recommendations for future policies and practices. For goal number 1, we need to ask ourselves, how does education support our combat towards climate change? Why is it important for education to play a role in climate change? For goal number 2, this is where the inquiry, creativity, and asking critical questions come into play. Student engagement is captured, and their learning environment becomes built using their own interests. Without this second goal, then goal number 3 would not be able to happen. Goal number 3 works through the inquiry model that students and teachers will be able to make the recommendations for the future. The inquiry model is a perfect way to introduce climate change education. The cycle of planning, retrieving, processing, creating, sharing, and evaluating takes the students through the steps of finding a topic of interest gathering all information needed, and finally evaluating their findings and making the next steps. This process is a cycle. This process fully aligns with the 3 goals and setting students up for success with climate change education. The Climate Change Education Acting for Change reading also discusses 9 recommendations for change. It states that climate change education needs to have a greater role in responses to climate change, have climate change leaders in school boards and schools, have understanding of human ecology, be interdisciplinary, embrace climate change as a condition of contemporary environmental and social imbalances, be place and community inspired and responsive, effectively engage the political, engage Indigenous and local cultural knowledges and practices, and be imaginative, exciting, hopeful, and playful. Climate change education across Canada. This chart, from Policy Coherence in Climate Change and Education Policy, a national overview, is extremely interesting. The lack of curriculum reform, though the highest category, is still only at 62% of Canada making the change to ensure climate change in the classroom. As our discussions have shared over the last week, teachers can only implement so much climate change education without it being directly linked to curriculum. Furthermore, the lack of adaptations for roles of post-secondary, efficient school infrastructures, and technical vocational education are sitting at less than 50% of provinces. The government has set up tax rebates and returns for homeowners to improve the efficiency of their homes. Should the same not be implemented for schools? When it comes to technical and vocational education, I see the growth in the post-secondary school level, but unfortunately, in the Durham region in particular, there is not much growth at the secondary level. You would think with the help of the University of Ontario and Durham College, there would be growth in this. Instead, vocational educational schools are closing. What programs will they create to replace these within a regular secondary school setting? It seems that change needs to happen in more than just the curriculum aspect. Looking at the McBain reading, we can see that educators get into the mindset that they need to have a solid understanding on a topic before teaching it. But why? Co-learning with our students shows that we are still learning as well. It allows students to take the lead on their own learning, and it allows for collaboration between student, teacher, school, community, and the world. Allowing students to take responsibility of their own learning would make for a stronger engagement in teaching and learning of climate change. Field emphasizes that student voice is currently absent, and this should not be the case when it's their education and the future of the climate directly affects them. Collaboration between educator and student is key. Students need to have a voice and a say in their climate change education. Kagawa and Selby discuss disaster risk reduction, DRR, and climate change education, CCE. Disaster risk reduction is building resilience against harm from disasters. Disaster risk reduction is all about reducing the effects of disasters as a result of climate change, whereas climate change education is concerned with the causes of the disasters. Kagawa and Selby argue that it's important to take a holistic approach to climate change education. A holistic approach means looking at the big picture and incorporating all elements. Kagawa and Selby show this graphic in their article. The understanding and attentiveness portion relates to creating alertness and mindfulness to climate change and making people aware. The mitigation portion relates to identifying causes of climate change and identifying how to rectify those causes. And the adaptation portion relates to developing skills to better cope with climate impacts. Addressing and incorporating all of these will lead to better climate change education. Kagawa and Selby state that storm-ready curriculum provision in which disaster risk reduction, climate change, and climate change adaptation and mitigation are holistically treated, and relevant knowledge, skills, and attitudes fully addressed, speaks therefore to cross-curricular infusion in which each and every subject has a part to play as a carrier of rich potential. Looking at climate change education holistically and applying learning through cross-curricular methods will allow the learning to be more successful. These are some of the issues and some of the goals and requirements we have read about this week.